Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Learning from the Pros. Joining me today is JD Garcia. He is the head of RevOps and strategy at Impactable. And today he's going to be sharing his 10 tips for designing a LinkedIn funnel architecture. Welcome, JD.
Hey, glad to be here.
I'm pumped, man. This is our first official content piece we're doing together. And like you are a wealth of information. If folks don't know about you, you post a lot of great content on LinkedIn. And I feel like you have really unique insights based on the depth that you go in your posts. And I'm really excited to
Mhm.
like kind of pick your brain and go a little bit deeper in this
Yeah,
conversation together.
yeah,
So
yeah. I'm excited for this.
why don't we kick off first with like your background and just kind of give some context for people if they're not familiar with you.
Yeah, yeah. So, no experience in marketing. I started working in video rental, so Hollywood Video, Blockbuster, medical sales, timeshare, telecommunications, and then landed in marketing. So it was originally just like a side hustle. So I wanted to make like extra cash. I was posting on LinkedIn. I met with Justin and started getting into this whole like kind of LinkedIn world. And I really liked it. I like puzzles a lot. So like putting things together and like figuring out kind of like puzzle games even are really exciting to me. And that's how I kind of feel like marketing is. So it was like understanding the different pieces and like, okay, if you put this here, it can do this. And it's all like just kind of like a giant puzzle. So I had no marketing background or anything before, let's say 5 years ago. And then I just went deep. Like I just dove in on the deep end on the LinkedIn side. So people like AJ Wilcox, who've been around for a while, like super technical, super knowledgeable. But 5 years ago kind of came in and just spent like hundreds of hours crying, hitting my keyboard, like, screaming at the monitor, trying to figure stuff out. And I still do this sometimes. So you never quite get it. But yeah, all of that kind of like learning experience. And now I just kind of share, like my headline says, I know a little bit about LinkedIn ads, and that's what I share.
That's awesome. I think you know a lot more than you give yourself credit for sure. And just like before we dive into your first tip, what a great analogy. Like you think about it like a puzzle piece.
Mm-hmm.
That is the key because once you can think about it from that perspective of a puzzle piece, then you can try to figure out what are the pieces that are going to make sense to
Yep.
form the puzzle that you're trying to create.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly that. And we can get into this. So like when I think about like this whole thing of like LinkedIn architecture, this one guy commented on one of my posts when I talked about it, and he's like, architecture is supposed to be for like buildings and stuff. Like he was just kind of like, whatever, just rage baiting me or something. But I was like, no, I mean, like architecture is anything you build. Like you can architect, like when people talk about AWS or like any of the hyperscalers,
Mm.
they're like cloud architects. And it's because like you're just taking these different pieces and you're creating something with it. And the whole goal with like thinking about your campaign architecture is you're trying to build like momentum for yourself. And even when I talk to somebody for the first time and they're like, hey, what should we start with? We have this product or we have this thing. I'm like, what are you currently doing now that has success? Let's piggyback off of that to start because you already have some momentum built with that. We can take that and we can help to, have some incremental lift on that as an initial kind of like POC. But this whole idea of like, LinkedIn architecture, campaign architecture, like really what it comes down to is like, how do I design this like funnel or how do I design this flow in the way that's going to get me the best output? Real simple, but
I
not
love
simple.
that. Yeah. And like for everyone listening that you approach ads with like a spaghetti mindset and you don't feel like you
Mhm.
have a lot of consistency and control over like the inputs and the outputs, this episode is for you because the big difference between paid and organic, and paid is nothing more than guaranteed distribution, but with paid you're trying to channel that guaranteed distribution in a strategic way to the best of your abilities, which a lot of things are out of your control, but to the best of your abilities you can try to create some sort of mechanism of like consistent predictable scale, which I think is the big thing and a great segue to the first tip for today's
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. So let's talk about tip number one. Outline your variables, all your variables, AKA put out all your puzzle pieces on the table. Get everything kind of out there. Like one of the things that's really important for this, you may be thinking like, oh, my budget, right? Like I need a budget. Yes, you need a budget. And sometimes you have something earmarked for that. But you really need to like understand your audience size and accessibility. So like, what does that look like? Like you can go into Campaign Manager. You don't need to spend any money or add your credit card or whatever, but you can go into Campaign Manager, load in whatever lists you want, do whatever third-party integrations you want to do, and you can start building out some of these audience sizes and then get some ideas in terms of like how active and accessible those audiences are. But you need to know this. Like, you need to know how large the audience is. You need to know like maybe how you want to segment them, like know the CEO of 10,000 person companies. They're not going to fill out your lead gen form. So don't even bother, maybe find another point of entry, kind of like take a realistic approach. Like, okay, what are the different audiences? What's the budget that I have? How do I want to do my targeting? What content do I have? What are the content gaps that I have? Like if you think about this from like the B2B, prospects perspective, they're not hanging around LinkedIn waiting for some awesome ad to go click on and sign up. They have problems. Like they have other things that they're dealing with right now. And maybe the problem you're trying to solve for, maybe it's number 72 on their list of things that they need to get done. Now you want to move that up the priority list, but you're not going to get them to just do something, immediately. So you need to kind of think about, okay, well, what are the pieces of content that somebody needs to see before they would likely take the action that I want? What does that sequence kind of look like? So you're thinking about this, you're thinking about how you're going to track these things. So you're outlining all of those kind of variables. And these are the different pieces that you're going to start with to start kind of like whiteboarding this. And I'll move to step 2 or tip 2, but any questions or comments you want to add to that?
Yeah, I have so many, but I feel like a lot of them will get answered in the subsequent tips. So let's move on to tip 2. What I'll do for everyone listening as well, because JD, you're going through all the different variables and you're like content, audience, size, like all these things in the show notes. If you guys are watching the video right now, we'll have it in the corresponding article written out. So if you want to just kind of like follow along, you can reference that because the master is going at at his speed right now. So if you guys are a little bit earlier on, then you can reference that. So yeah,
how funny would that be if we just told everyone like, hey, this is not going to be anywhere. You better catch it. This is a one-time watch video.
Everyone like somebody watching right now that's like driving in the car. They'll like pull over on the side of the road. And just
I gotta record this somewhere.
Start writing in their notes.
All right, so let's go to step 2. Like step 2 is just like tip 2, like whiteboard this. Like if you want to be fancy and cool, you can use Figma or Miro or whatever other visualization tool you want to use. But like you honestly don't need that to start. Get a pen and paper and a spiral notebook, or pull a piece of paper from your printer or get a whiteboard and just try to like map this thing out, like visually, like, does this actually kind of make sense? Oh, what, you have 10 blocks up front for like all the lead gen forms you're going to run. Like when you look at that, do you think like, man, this is great promotions in my near future? Probably not. So you want to start kind of like mapping this out and like how things are actually going to flow, and your variables are going to help you to do that. So let's say you figured out your audience size and you're like, okay, my TAM is, I don't know, 500,000. But the one I want to start with and kind of narrow in on, maybe there's 65,000 people. So I have this audience of, kind of 65,000 people. Like what is the piece of content, or what things do they need to see in order for them to be interested enough to take some type of action that allows me to funnel them to another layer? Like, what are those things? What does that kind of look like? And you kind of map this out. So like, this is what I think they should see kind of first. These are the different things I expect them to maybe do. And if they do these things, these are kind of the next things that I would say. And you can kind of plot this out and figure out like, what are the different things, like types of engagement that they're going to do, how this should actually kind of flow. And then if this just makes sense, like if you're kind of looking at this now, if this makes sense can be a little bit dangerous, especially if you don't have any like previous knowledge. Cause like, I don't know, if you're a doctor and you can look at somebody and like, this doesn't make sense. But like, if you're, I don't know, you're a custodian there and then you come look at a medical chart, like this doesn't feel right. Like your intuition is not going to be as great as the doctor. But the flow, like at a basic level, the flow should kind of make sense, and you want to whiteboard that out. I'm going to go to tip 3 because this ties into tip 2, and I'll just take a quick pause at that point.
Yep.
But tip 3 is going to be like kind of setting what your goals are going to be for each of those kind of different stages. Now, hey, shocker, or maybe not a shocker, but the measures of success you use for a top of funnel campaign group are going to be different than the ones you use for your bottom of funnel campaign group, or for your cross selling and upselling, or if you're focused on deal velocity. Each campaign group and then each campaign, it's going to have its own kind of goal. And you think about this like a sports team, like, if you take soccer, for example, like not every single player has the same goal. Like each person has a
Mm-hmm.
different role that they need to play. And like, how does a team win? Well, the team wins when everyone does their specific job to the best of their ability. Right. And that's where you win. So when you think about this and you think about your different campaigns, each campaign is going to have a goal. And I won't go into every single one, but I'll just give you a little tidbit. For example, if I'm running a top of funnel campaign to like a large cold audience, my goal is to get enough engagement, or to get engagement from that campaign to be able to funnel people in for as like little money as possible. Because
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn is like all the other platforms out there, it will spend your money. Like they will. Like do whatever you want. Like they're not going to tell you no. Like audience expansion, audience network on, all your ORs, 20 million audience size.
All
You can
day.
launch. Go for it. Go. Yeah. So they're not going to tell you. So like you need to know what your goals are going to be for each of these campaigns in advance. And then as each one of those is doing what it's supposed to do, it's going to help you get towards where you want to go. So
Mm-hmm.
quick pause.
Yeah, so much to unpack. So just for everyone listening, like JD just mentioned, like tip one is like you need to outline your variables. So what are the different requisite components within this architecture, this funnel architecture that you're creating for yourself? One really tactical thing for everyone listening, and kind of like an analogy that I use with my team and how to train them on strategy and how to get them to think outside the box. Because if you're a junior person listening to this, it might be hard, or if you're working in house or whatever the case might be, like you're newer to strategy, like it might be hard to juggle all these different pieces. It can be a bit overwhelming. So one way I like to frame this is anytime you enter a new role or you take on a new client, imagine you just entered a new video game, and that video game has a set of rules, right? That will determine, hey, this is success, this is failure, etc. So like before even getting down to the base level of like understanding the variables within your funnel architecture, first understand the rules of the game you're playing. So that means, what are the constraints leadership has given you? They probably have a pipeline goal. That's part of the game, right? How can I get that pipeline goal? Can I get you one deal for $1 million and job well done? Or is it, I need to get you $1 million in pipeline, but it has to be from these certain regions? Okay, can it be equally split between North America and EMEA? Or can I just get you it all in North America? So what are the rules? What are the constraints of the game that you've been given first? And then once you understand the context there from the business level, then understanding who you're going after, like who are they, what they do, etc., all that product marketing content. So once you do that, now when you get into actually designing your funnel architecture, you'll have so much more visibility on, okay, wait a second. And like this ties so well with your point around like understanding your campaign goals, because then okay, based on the rules of the game that I'm playing. Like I'll give you a real example. There's a client that they shifted towards like a completely ungated motion, like ungated content. And whether like we talk gated versus ungated, like philosophically is a conversation for another day, but like with their rules for their business, their constraints, their leadership was only giving them credit for the things they can directly associate, that they had a digital paper trail. So by understanding that one rule of their game, they know they have to do lead gen.
Yeah.
And like starting from there first, I like when I kind of walked through that analogy with like my team members and like clients, I could see like the peace of mind and like, oh, wait a second, I get it, like whether
Yeah.
it's right or wrong, that's like a whole
Yeah.
other conversation, but that's the
Yeah.
game you've been given, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like now with that context, now that you understand the actual game you're playing and you understand the market you're in and the people you're serving, now when it comes time to like actually design your funnel architecture, because what we're talking about here is we're trying to create an experience, right? Like you
Mhm.
mentioned it, it's like your priority 73 if you're lucky in terms of like what's going on, especially if it's a cold
Yeah.
audience. Like they don't even know they have a problem in the first place. It's like
Yeah.
blissful ignorance. So it's like,
Yeah.
how can you actually now start to like meet them halfway and kind of put these different things together? So just to recap,
Yeah.
outline your variables, get clear on your audience size, your budget, how you're going to actually reach this person, what are the types of content you want to showcase in front of them. Then from there, step two, whiteboard your funnel. Like, we'll add examples in the show notes here of like some examples that you've had, JD, that you've posted on LinkedIn that
Sure.
are awesome.
Yeah.
So just to like kind of give people a visual reference, but like actually, putting this now all into play. And then now finally setting your campaign goals for each stage. I love that you touched on this because so many people measure all campaigns equally. And it's
Mhm.
such, I mean, it's like, it's apples, oranges, and bananas. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
completely different.
And a table,
Um,
like, yeah, now we have furniture.
A hundred
Yeah.
percent. 100%. I'm curious, like on the campaign goal side, and just kind of speaking to these three tips here. Like when you're going through like, let's say somebody comes to you, let's just workshop this, right? So I come to you and I'm like, hey, I've got $10,000 a month in budget. My goal is to drive $1,000 in qualified pipeline. I've given you the constraints now, so you now understand from the business context. And then from there, I tell you, my ICP is, let's just say it's like product managers. Now from there, are there like certain things you're thinking of, like when you're going through those first three steps of like early signs of this is going to work, this isn't going to work,
Yeah.
or kind of like traps?
Yeah, I'm looking to see like, do you have an established product market fit? Like, are we going after, is this like a new offering for your company? Or is this something that like you've been running for a while and now you're trying to scale? Like a good indicator of success is if you're already having success on other channels and now you're looking to like plug in LinkedIn or like beef up LinkedIn because you've already validated this. Like people have already like are willing to give you money in order to do this. And this is more for like established companies. It's harder when it's like a startup where it's primarily been like founder led growth and they have access to certain people that like, would be extremely difficult to get access to through marketing. And then they try to bring that thinking into marketing, be like, yeah, let's go after the, CTO of like, whoa. Like, you're not going to get that same level. But I'm looking to see if they've done this stuff before, if they had success with it before. I'm trying to understand like what their ability to then turn that lead into pipeline looks like, because like regardless, like we're marketers, right? So like we're focused on the marketing side, but like I'm sure you know as well as I do, if they can't take a lead and turn it into revenue, it doesn't matter how good a job you do as a marketer. Like they still need to be able to convert that into pipeline
Yeah.
and into revenue. So I still ask about those things because it's going to matter. Maybe not today, but it will in
Mm-hmm.
a couple of months. And then I try to understand like what the tracking maybe looks like for them. So like CAPI is really good, revenue attribution reports really good, just to give us kind of like more visibility. And then I try to get an understanding of like the support they have from their leadership, because that's also really helpful. Is the person writing the check somebody that's a non-marketer and thinks marketing is dumb? Like, okay, well, we have an uphill battle, and like we need to consider that when we're deciding how we build this. Like to your point earlier, if we need like direct one-to-one attribution, then yeah, probably lead gen forms, because I know the person that filled that out is directly tied,
Mm-hmm.
versus kind of like, okay, we have a view through conversion. Like, yeah, you went ahead and put the, click, 1 day view, and you're being really strict about it. But that view through conversion, when we had it, it came in, as organic, or it came in as direct, and it's harder to kind of make some of those cases. But knowing what you're up against, like what the person you're talking to, what they're measured on, like what's going to like get you a promotion, what's going to say you're doing a good job, and then internally, what does that support look like for you for this? Like those are things you have to think about when you're deciding how to build this.
Yeah, I love it. So we outlined the variables, we whiteboarded our funnel, we set our campaign goals for each stage. What's tip number four?
Tip number 4 is create ads that match the funnel stage. So very basic. And I know like there's a lot of talk on this, and like you said earlier, this isn't like a, right or wrong, or like maybe like morally correct or whatever. But like, I know some people say like, okay, funnel stages are not like that. Like, B2B prospects kind of bounce around, they do their own thing. And I'm like, yeah, they do, but that's really hard to build a funnel around like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, like I get it. They do different things, but the whole idea about creating content for their funnel stage is you're just trying to, as good as you can, You're just trying to match content with an action that somebody took. So here's a good question to ask. Should somebody that visited your LinkedIn company page 11 months ago, so they visited back in October of 2023, should that person see the same content as somebody who visited your pricing page yesterday? I think the answer is pretty obvious. No, like it should be a different experience based on the action that the person took. Does that mean that they're all linear? Like, no, not everybody just goes through this pretty little funnel and then they put out, how did you hear about us? Oh, LinkedIn ad. And here's the link. I clicked on the 3 dots and I got it for you. Like that'd be fantastic. They're not going to do that, but you want to create the content that's going to match basically the level of action that they took. So top of funnel, they haven't taken any action. You're showing up in their feed. And now people are seeing more ads than they had been before. That's another conversation, organic content creators know what I'm talking about, but you're showing up unannounced in their feed and you want to have something of value that captures their interest. Like all I'm trying to do for like really cold layer campaigns is I'm just trying to pique somebody's curiosity. I just want to get you curious enough that you go, and you decide to go look around. Most people are not going to click on ads. Let's say you have a great click-through rate. Let's say you have a 1% click-through rate. You know what that actually means? That means that like 10 people out of 1,000 who saw your ad actually clicked on your ad. Like that means 9,990 other people didn't click on your ad. And I'm talking about website visit, not thought leadership. If you have a 1% click-through rate on your engagement campaign for your thought leadership, like you need to shut that down.
Yeah,
yeah, it's a problem. But you want to go ahead and match that. So when you think about this and you think about the content that you create, you're just trying to do that for like the funnel stage that they're in. If they take in higher intent actions, then yeah, like you want to have things that are more, kind of direct. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And then are you thinking you would take it a step further if there's like segmentation by persona? So now it's like for the, persona 1 product manager, you're going to show this type of content, this type of message, and, persona 2, so on and so forth.
Yeah, CFO is not going to care about the finance person isn't going to care about the same thing as like the procurement person or the product person or the salesperson or like these different personas. Like they have different things that they care about. Now, depending on your budget, and I was talking about this today, like you have to pick and choose where you're going to do your segmentation. You can't segment everything on a tiny budget. Like I want to segment by NORAM, EMEA, and APAC. And then I want to segment by, product manager, CFO, and then the person, in, the business leader or something. And then I want to segment by product. And then I want to segment by funnel stage. Like it's a multiplier. Like before you know it, like each campaign is going to get, 42 cents a day as a daily budget, which you can't even do, by the way. But yeah, so you want to think about the content that you create, and then you want to think about too where you can find common denominators. So be smart about some of these things too. If you know that you can't get, hyper segmented, then you're going to need to triage and make decisions about what you segment.
All right. So tip number 5.
Tip number 5 is kind of a joke, but it's important. Like, don't forget attribution, which like everyone probably isn't going to forget because you're trying to measure and see like what works and what doesn't work. I didn't come up with this, but I really, really like this. So Amir from Hockey Stack had said one time in one of his posts, he's like, hey, if you are considering buying Hockey Stack because you want to prove if a channel works or not, he's like, don't even buy it. It's like, don't buy it for that reason. He's like, where you want it is if you're trying to get signals and understand like what in your marketing is working and what is contributing. And I thought that was really interesting because there's that saying in marketing, which I know I'm a 5-year-old marketer, so I haven't been around long enough to say that back in my day, this was a saying, but I've heard this. It's like half of all marketing works. You just don't know, which half. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the attribution thing, like, yeah, I do want some last touch attribution because I do want to see like, what had an influence on that. But I also want to understand too, the things that, happen along the way. So a little bit of a tip here, and you got to be careful with this, but what I like to do for like the really high intent actions is I like to create like a duplicate conversion event. So what I'll do is I'll have a conversion event that's last touch, last campaign that has a high conversion value associated with it. And then I'll have a second one that is a last touch each campaign that has a 90-day click and a 90-day view. view with like 1 cent conversion value or like a really low conversion value. And then I can kind of see like, as I have my funnel built, I can kind of see like the conversions, like what are the different pieces of content that contributed to that conversion that took place over the last 90 days, whether that's views or whether that's clicks. Now I say you have to be careful with that because if you're using the API to pull data out from LinkedIn, it's going to count all conversions exactly the same. So it doesn't matter if it's last touch each, last touch last, like, or if this one's a book a demo or this one's a register for like a webinar, it's all the same. It's all clumped together as like conversions. And then even in the dashboard, if you're managing this inside Campaign Manager and if you're doing the breakdown, if you have so many conversions in there, it just becomes unreadable at a certain point. So you want to be careful with this, but you want to make sure that you're tracking attribution both in the platform, both in your own system, self-reported. If you're using Gong to listen to sales calls and figure out if somebody mentions LinkedIn, like you want to kind of tie all these things together. And of course, there's also CAPI and revenue attribution report, which are also helpful.
Yeah, this is a really big one. I think at the end of the day, like V1 that I always recommend to everyone is like just measure directly attributed and blended. That's kind of like the go-to.
Yeah.
Okay, for the things that we are trying to get a 1-for-1 out of, okay, how is it performing? Things that operate in that way. But most things, it's not going to be a 1-for-1. So instead, like baseline, how much did you invest last quarter? How much did you generate overall, paid and organic? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is my cost per going down? Is my pipe to spend increasing? And I love that metric, pipe to spend, because it's a metric that monitors the efficiency of your efforts. So if you notice quarter over quarter, pipe to spend is increasing, that means you're doing a great job. Your paid dollars are being more efficient in response to like blending it with the organic and direct, where you're not getting that direct association. So for everyone in the room, like if you're not tracking blended and last touch already, start there. That's like V1. And then if you need more trust, more confidence, more like validation, then you can start to graduate into like some of these tools, right? But even then with like LinkedIn, you could just use the LinkedIn demographics report as like an additional touch point for like more verification. And then like finally, if you need even more verification, then it becomes like these tools. But oftentimes if people skip, it just like they get on these tools, but then they don't realize these tools, like there's a ramp up period of like when they can actually become usable, because they have to like ingest a certain amount of data. Your CRM instance isn't like actually configured properly. So it's like the grass is greener on the other side, and then there's always something in your way and you can't just like actually make forward progress.
Yeah. I think it was, I forget his name, but it's a guy named Chris, but he says the magic you're looking for is in the work that you're avoiding. I say that to say that if your CRM's a mess, you should probably start there.
Yeah, I love this. Yeah, I love this. All right. So I think we're on tip number 6.
Tip number 6. We're 40 minutes in. Well, I don't know how long this one is, but yeah, we're making progress. Okay, I'm gonna try to go a little quicker on these. So tip number 6, like get efficient before you start getting fancy. So like there's the two sides to this. There's like the efficiency side, and then there's the effectiveness side for like marketing. Marketing effectiveness is like, yeah, my pipe to spend's increasing. Like obviously I'm being effective. But before that, you need to be efficient. So like think about like a car, for example. Like if you need to drive, I don't know, 50 miles, it's going to be way harder for you to drive those if all your tires are flat and you haven't changed your oil and you have a quarter tank. So you need to be efficient before you get effective. So what does that mean? Like there's likely waste inside of your campaigns that you want to address so that you can make sure you're getting the most out of your budget and that you can be as efficient as possible on your path to getting effective. I mean, you'd be surprised, the people, who are listening, probably not you, Silvio, because you see it, but how much waste I see in ad accounts, just like little things. And you may not think like, oh, there's this little thing here, there's this little thing here. But yeah, that has a multiplied effect. So you have 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%. Like it ends up being quite inefficient. So you want to be efficient. Yeah. I'll go to tip number 7, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So get efficient. And then tip number 7, like Retarget like a pro. What does that actually mean? Well, we kind of talked about it a little bit when we were talking about create ads that match the funnel stage, but you want to match the right content with the audience at the right time. If that sounds hard, it's because it is. It's not always easy to do this, but I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example that's like fairly easy to do. If you talk about like your high intent audience is going to be someone or people that have taken, like they've really kind of raised their hand. Like maybe they've engaged in your top of funnel, they've engaged in your middle of funnel, they've taken some other, high intent action. Like your bottom of funnel audience can be like, let's say a 0 to 30-day audience, depending on what your audience size is. But it's going to be a 0 to 30-day audience because I probably don't want to beat people over the head with high friction CTAs for too long, because that can also have an opposite effect. So I want to be smart about it. So I have kind of like a high intent layer, which is my kind of 0 to 30-day audience, where they're probably going to see other content, but they're also going to have this off ramp for them that's built. And then I would have, let's say, like a 180-day audience where I'm going to run content that's not going to be as expensive, but can still keep me top of mind. Like, what does that mean? Text ads are a good example. Do text ads as a website visit objective, do the manual bidding, whatever it has, set your daily budget to, $20, $50, doesn't matter because it's not going to spend it anyway. And then just have your retargeting audience that's kind of parked there. And if they, see it or they go back to your website and you have your retargeting funnel built out properly, they're going to get pulled back into your funnel anyway. But you just want to be smart about how you structure your, retargeting audiences.
This is such a big one in B2B specifically because depending on your sales cycle, like we have a client that's in the government space, they have a 36-month sales cycle. 36 months. Staying top of mind, I mean, is truly half the battle. And, not to nerd out too hard here, but one of the things that like I really geek out on with paid social platforms and just ads in general, but specifically paid social, is when you really think about it, like these tools, like you can manufacture celebrity. I can pay money to be famous to a very, very, very small group of people. So in their eyes, they're like, man, like JD is everywhere. He's in, like, I go to LinkedIn, I see him. I go to Google, I see him. I go to YouTube, like everywhere. But in the reality is like you're spending like $50 a day because you're, you
in my mom's basement,
Yeah, exactly. But it's possible, it's very possible, especially like a lot of people selling courses online, like it's super possible.
This is a coaching course for coaches.
Exactly. Yeah. Perception, reality. You know what I mean? It's such a big deal. So for everyone listening, if it's not what you do, but it's how you do it. And it's like, think about like all the intention behind each one of these steps JD is going through, like these are it's the death by the thousand cuts, and like that reference, that analogy, it's like, it's oftentimes a lot of small things that sink the boat. It's not just some big hole in the middle of the boat. You know what I mean?
Once in a while, it's an iceberg. But mostly
once in a while it is. Yeah. Shout out to the Titanic.
Shout out.
All right. Let's fly through the remainder of these tips.
Yes. So
tip 8.
Tip number 8. Test smart, not random. I was trying to come up with a cool word play there, and I didn't do it. But like, just it's like, hey, what if we do this? Like, it can't be random. Like, you want to pick your tests. Now, to be clear, you should be testing all the time, everywhere. In your campaigns, you're testing ads. You have these that perform well. You have these that didn't. You pause those. You take the breadcrumbs you found. You load new ads, and you kind of repeat this process. You're using one objective, it's doing well, you decide changing to another objective. You have this audience, and then you identify kind of a pocket within there, and you pull out a hero audience. You decide to test that. Your formats. This isn't like should we do red or should we do blue? This isn't a that thing. This is like, you want to be smart about what you're testing, because you can't test everything all the time. It can get really burdensome. So you want to be smart about the things that you want to test, and you don't want to stack tests. So what I mean by that is, like, I don't want to like, okay, where our performance is here, we're going to change these 3 things and then see if it improves the performance. Well, guess what? If it makes it better or if it makes it worse, you don't know which one of those 3 things you did actually contributed to it. So like, there's a reason why it's called A/B tests and not A, B, C, D, E, F, G tests. So you want to be smart, smart with that.
Yeah.
Tip number 9.
That's a great.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to double click on that last point, one really tactical thing for people listening in terms of experimentation and kind of being more mindful about what you're doing is getting in the habit of like writing down a hypothesis statement. So just to walk through it, what that looks like, it's if we do X, I believe Y as measured by Z. So if we switch from maximum delivery to manual bidding, I believe we can drive a lower cost per 1,000 impressions or cost per click as measured in the LinkedIn ads interface.
Yeah.
Just like there's a great quote from Albert Einstein. It's like a problem defined is a problem half solved. He's like, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 55 minutes writing it down and defining it and the last 5 minutes solving it. And there's so much truth to that because oftentimes we just go, to your point, it's like unconscious testing, and there's levels to everything. It's like, yes, there's natural progression in an account, but it's like, are you actually taking a step back and saying, like, I love the analogy. I forget who said this, but it's like the analogy of like, if you put a gun to my head and you said, make the thing work, like kind of taking that frame of like, okay, we're doing a lot, but are these game changers, right? Or are they just like micro improvements? And you need both. And like, I think to your point, just like to really iterate what you're trying to say here is like, really think through like, how can I have some big bets, of like tests worthwhile that can actually drive the needle in a significant way.
Yeah. I think I don't want to like beat a dead horse here, but like, knowing the question is like most important thing, like what question to ask. What was it? I forget what it is. Well, the answer was 42. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You ever see that? He's like, what's the meaning of the universe? And then the answer was like 42. And it's like, okay, well, that's not really helpful. And like, the challenge was like figuring out what the right question was to ask. Like that was the hard part, not the answer.
Have you ever seen that commercial? It's like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop?
Yes. Yeah, the owl. That's
what came to my head when you said that.
Man, that owl was funny. I always laugh when I saw that thing. Like as an adult, I realized I'm like, there's just an owl with a lollipop here. Just
it's
like
so random. Yeah. And it's funny, like the shit that sticks in your mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to remember that later. All
right. Tip 9.
Tip 9. Keep tabs on performance. Like, again, like this is kind of like the other one where like, don't forget attribution. Like this is like, well, duh, I'm going to keep tabs on performance. But like, there's things that you need to know, like to check, like what is the cadence here for checking on this? Like if you do a new campaign, like if I just launched a campaign and I did something that I think is a little bit risky, and I'm like, I'm curious to see like if this plays out. I'm probably going to check that a few times a day because I don't want to get yelled at. If I'm doing something, or if I have campaigns that are kind of like established, and this is going to tie into tip number 10, if I have things that are kind of established, that I'm looking at like broader trends over time versus just kind of like a knee-jerk reactions. So like this whole thing, keep tabs on performance. This isn't like a license or me advocating for you going in and like testing things or making changes every single day. Like don't do that. Like if you were smart about how you built your campaign, and you were smart about identifying, kind of your main goal, what you're trying to accomplish, and then what each thing needs to play, like how each thing needs to perform to kind of play into that, then what to look for in those campaigns to measure the success. But you need it to be statistically like significant. If an ad has spent $5, don't go pause the ad because it doesn't have a click. Like you want to measure these things, but you want enough data to actually draw like meaningful insights on that. Now, what is the magic number? I don't know. Maybe Silvio, like you have this kind of like, benchmark. Usually for me, like at an ad level, if something spent like, about $100, I will kind of like, okay, I have enough data here, unless it's just like really, really painfully obvious that this one just sucks, that I'll go through and kind of cut it out. But the platform inside of LinkedIn is getting better in front of like in terms of reporting. If you are using like, agency analytics or Looker Studio or something else to kind of, visualize this, that can be helpful too, but you need to be monitoring this.
Yeah, totally. All right. Tip number 10.
Tip number 10, learn, improve, repeat. So once you've built your funnel, so you have your architecture, you did all these things, you listened to this and, you played it back a few times or maybe you read the show notes. and you kind of like built this out, you're going to learn things along the way, that things that work, things that don't work. You're going to develop kind of new hypothesis, and you're going to go through this kind of cycle again. And you're going to like repeat this. It's not, there isn't some like magic thing that you discover. Like there's not like a destination that you're reaching and you just like, I finally hit it, 50 million in pipeline. Like now I can retire. Like, next quarter is going to roll around and you're going to have new targets that you're going to have to hit, maybe a lower budget. I'm sorry if that's you, but like you're going to like repeat this entire process. And I'm going to do a reference just like you did, Silvio. That song, it starts back at one, make you fall in love with. I don't know if that's how the song is, right? And then you start back at one. Like you just go through this process, again. Yeah, that's it.
I love it. Guys, if you haven't gotten value, you haven't been listening, just to do a quick recap of all of our tips today. Tip number 1 was to outline your variables, get clear on your budget, your targeting, your tracking, the constraints you've been given in relation to your goals. Tip number 2 was to whiteboard your funnel. So like actually pen to paper, whatever works for you. I personally love I'm a work better writing, so I write everything out. And then from there, I send it to my design team and they make it look pretty. So whatever works for you, like whiteboard your funnel. Number 3 is to set your campaign goals now for each stage and understand that each one is not meant to be judged equally. They all have their own job to do. I love the analogy of a team. Like everyone has their objectives on that team of like what they do in terms of those different positions. Tip number 4 was to create ads that match each funnel stage. Have empathy for the user and ask yourself, if somebody visited these pages or they did these actions, depending on how you're reaching them, should they be seeing what you're about to give them, right? Would you want to see that? And I love framing it from that perspective. Tip number 5 was to not forget attribution, but also to kind of forget attribution. After a certain point, it just doesn't become productive, and make sure, you have the basics covered, but at the end of the day, don't let it become a crutch. Tip number 6 is to get efficient before you get fancy. I love this one. Like kind of what spoke to me when you're going through this, JD, is like, there's like minimum viable product. I'm thinking like minimum viable effort. Like what is the minimum viable effort to get a return or like some sort of signal? Like so many people are like so quick to marry LinkedIn. They're like, we're going to invest 100 grand and we're going to do 7-step strategy and all this. It's like, wait a second. Let's just do like minimum viable effort. Let LinkedIn prove itself to us, and then we will give some more, and you kind of expand from there. So I love that. Tip number 7 was to retarget like a pro. This is like one of those things everybody hears. They're like, oh, you got to retargeting, blah, blah, blah. But like, they don't actually do it. And taking it a step further, like you talked about, like, hey, should somebody who went to your high intent pages 30 days ago see the same thing as somebody that's been in your audience piece from now? Like, I don't even know what I did 180 days ago. You know what I mean? Can you imagine them? So that's a great frame. Tip number 8 was to test smart, not random. Be mindful. And remember, it's A/B testing, not ABC testing. That's a great way of saying it. Tip number 9 was to keep tabs on performance. Like you don't want to set and forget this stuff. You want to make sure that this thing is actually progressing and it's moving in the right direction. And then tip number 10 was to learn, improve, and repeat. JD, this was incredible. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Find me on LinkedIn, JD Garcia. I don't think there's very many of them, and certainly none that have LinkedIn in their headline, so I should be easy to find.
Awesome. We will definitely have his LinkedIn connected down below, as well as a write-up of everything. So thank you so much for being here, JD. This was awesome. And everyone watching, if you're not subscribed right now, which I know you're not when I look at my YouTube analytics, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like this video. And feel free to connect with JD and ask any content and follow-ups on this video. Thanks so much. We'll see you in the next one.